Hi, fans of SeedButter. This video is a little different. I don't know why. For real though, obviously I'm not seeing any of you. I'm staring into the lens of a teleprompter, but it does really feel good to finally say hi to you guys. I've been thinking about how to do this for some time, and I guess I've come to the conclusion that the best way to do a face reveal is just to rip off the band-aid. For those of you who are coming here for the first time, this might not be a big deal to you, but I've never been behind the camera before. For you long-term SeedButter fans, I just want to open this video by saying thank you. A few days before I started this script, I got a comment from someone talking about my Mario Kart Wii Iceberg, which I made in 2022. And it kind of made me come to terms with the fact that many of you dedicated viewers have been doing this with me for like nearly 4 years total now. Not only that, but people are actually remembering jokes and referencing old stuff. It's really crazy. I won't drone on and on about how appreciative I am, but I mean it. I love doing this, I want to keep doing this, and I'm glad each and every one of you are a part of it as well. Anyway, with this being a face reveal and with me finally getting the chance to show more of me, I figured why not do an iceberg, a format which really made this channel successful in the first place, but do something a bit more personal where I could tell you some stories of mine. From there, I landed on making a Boy Scouts iceberg. I am an Eagle Scout myself, Boy Scouts was a great part of my life, and it's something that's both interesting and storied in and of itself. It's also something that lots of people just don't fully understand or know little about, so it seemed perfect. By now, you all know exactly what an iceberg is. Today will obviously be a little bit less conventional of an iceberg since this isn't necessarily an iceberg topic. You know, it's not a video game, it's not a conspiracy theory, and I'm not going to waste your time saying like,
every Boy Scout is personalized.
but I still think you'll come to enjoy this video. Also, with this being a different kind of iceberg and with scouting being such a big movement, there are going to be a million things that I could have put on here, but I just didn't. Furthermore, I'm describing a program which has seen a lot of changes recently, which I did, but I'm not a part of today. So I might get some stuff wrong, and if you see it, feel free to correct me down below. As always, if you have interesting things yourself that you've experienced or you've heard or thought of, let us know too. If you do enjoy this video, the next one will be very similar insofar as it will be a video in this format where I sort of talk about, well, myself a little bit. I have a connection to it. With that said, I want to thank you guys once more for being here, and I especially want to thank my Patreon members who got to see this video early. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and dive into the beginning of this iceberg with the very first tier. Also, a quick note I need to mention here is something about the naming convention. As we'll learn later, scouting is a worldwide movement, but the scouting program in the United States, which I was a part of, is called Scouts BSA, which is part of the umbrella organization Scouting America. I will often call these two things Boy Scouts and Boy Scouts of America, or BSA, respectively. That is not a philosophical or political endorsement of either name, it's just literally what's easy for me because that's what it was called when I was involved. Also, sometimes that name is still used. Also in this video, I'll be talking about scouting as an international movement, and BSA is just a quick way to differentiate American scouting from that. So if you are curious about the name change, don't worry because that does show up later on in the iceberg. Robert Baden-Powell. Starting off with a historical entry, the big poobah of scouts is Lord Robert Baden-Powell. Baden-Powell founded modern scouting, creating the Boy Scouts Association in the UK and serving as its first chief scout. He went to a public school in the UK and then joined the British Army, serving in India and Africa, seeing action in the Second Boer War. In 1884 and 1899, he wrote 2 books, titled Reconnaissance and Scouting and Aids to Scouting for NCOs and Men, respectively. These books, broadly speaking, were about being a military scout, doing recon. However, after coming back to the UK, he realized that they had become popular amongst youth organizations. From there, he decided to rework the content for a youth audience, experimenting with ideas and hosting the first Boy Scout camp on Brownsea Island, with mostly the sons of his friends attending. In 1908, he'd compile all of these ideas into one book, called Scouting for Boys, the first scout handbook ever and the 4th best-selling book of the 20th century. After that, scouting as a whole exploded, first in the UK, but also around the world. Boy Scouts derive a lot from Baden-Powell. Things about him, even at the personal level, are deeply embedded into various places in scouting. As we go on through this video, we'll learn more about him, so this section here isn't necessarily a perfect biography of this guy, but we'll keep touching on things about his life. To sum it up, he created the scouting movement. For those of you who came to this Iceberg to learn about scouting, basically, Boy Scouts, of course now they're technically called Scouts, but we'll get into that later, were the premier scouting organization in the United States. The scouting movement, though, is more than just that. It's a movement generally based off of scouting for boys and other material from Baden-Powell, and then individual countries, with the exception of a few, came up with their own programs about that material. Boy Scouts of America, as it was formerly called, which I was a part of, just is the American one. But Baden-Powell spent more of his time in the UK fostering scouting there. Eagle Scout. The Eagle Scout is easily the most recognizable award in scouting, probably internationally, but certainly in the USA. Its capstone requirement is the service project, or your Eagle project. Often if I meet Eagle Scouts, the first question we ask each other is, what was your project? But that isn't all that goes into it. The Eagle Scout is both an award and a rank. We'll talk about all the ranks soon, but yes, there are ranks in Boy Scouts. Advancing through them requires learning stuff, earning merit badges, and having time and grade with a leadership position. So for the Eagle Scout, you have to do all of that, but you also have to earn 21 merit badges, 14 of which are mandatory and the remainder are optional. And then finally, your service project. Usually Scouts get this award when they're around 16 up until 18, which is the cutoff. Around 2.7 million Americans have earned it since 1910. It's not the most difficult award in the world to get, but it is a fantastic conversation starter and it remains on my resume to this day. My project had to deal with, we had an outdoor classroom at my school and I removed swaths of invasive plants and put native trees in, as well as like a bench and some stuff. Fun fact, it was originally going to be called the Wolf Scout, but it got changed after just a few months of being in the first copy of the Boy Scout handbook. Also, the first guy to earn it was a 17-year-old from New York, and Baden-Powell actually flew to the US to sit on his board of review, a panel where you defend your project after you finish it. The project itself has to be an approved service project for your religious organization, school, or community. So the scope can be massive or small. There's no actual limit on either end. You just have to be able to defend its usefulness. I've seen people make a few sandwich boards and call it a day, and then I've seen people do insane woodworking projects that blew my mind. Two general requirements, though, that are really important are that, first of all, you direct it, you don't do it yourself, and second, that it isn't a fundraiser. With regard to the first, someone once told me that basically you should be able to do your Eagle project in a suit and not get dirty at all. You should be instructing and maybe demonstrating a technique, but you're not doing anything hands-on. It isn't a test of whether or not you can build something. It's a test of whether or not you can get dozens of volunteers who might be 12 years old to do it. Then there's the fundraiser thing. You have to add infrastructure. For example, if you really do want to do a fundraiser, you can pick a charity that needs a physical object. Say a food bank needs a refrigerator. You can run a massive 5K and raise thousands of dollars, but the actual project itself is installing the fridge. You can't just gather money. If you have leftover money, you have to give it to the project beneficiary, but you can't just raise money for them. I had a fantastic time doing my Eagle Scout. I did it when I was like 16 and I had to go around getting donations. I managed a budget and then volunteers. It certainly isn't the hardest thing in the world, but at the time I was so proud of it and it felt like the coolest thing ever. Uniform. This entry might be one of the many entries where I reveal that things have changed since I was in the program. I might be wrong about some of these things, but basically I'm going to go over a scout uniform and actually tell you what the things mean. Starting at the front, we have the fleur-de-lis. This is a major symbol for all of scouting, not just the American kind. This patch sort of symbolizes the Boy Scouts of America's connection to world scouting, or scouting as a whole, and technically it's called the World Crest. It's okay to wear it just like that, but you'll often see this ring patch around it. This was for the 100th anniversary of American Scouting, hence the since 1910. I actually got this handed to me when I was a Tiger Cub, so I was actually present in 2010, but I think you can still buy and wear them technically even if you weren't around in those days. There are also other anniversary patches, but in my experience, I've only ever seen that one. Then on the left breast, you have the rank patch. There are 7 different patches you might see there. Also, as you'll see in this photo of me here, if you're an Eagle Scout, you can wear your medal above the rank patch, but it's ceremonial. I can't remember the specific requirements for wearing it, but you don't wear it every single time. Also around here, you might have pins which show how many years you've been involved in scouting. On the right pocket, you have 2 things, a lodge patch and then the optional spot. The optional spot was really cool because you could put whatever patch you want there, and there's definitely a culture of having cool patches. It's a way of showing what events you were part of and what you saw or whatever. I have an awesome grandmother, and when I was in scouting, she would sew all my stuff, so I got to switch mine off and on a lot. In this photo, I'm wearing one from Northern Tier, something I'll talk about later. Your lodge strip represents your lodge for the Order of the Arrow. Again, something we'll revisit. Now, this is one of the cooler pieces of the uniform, I think. Right here are where scouts put their knot awards. So what is a knot award exactly? Well, there are tons of them. They all mean different things, and 99% of them are actually only meant for adults, sort of to honor their volunteering and their training. But you will see some scouts with some, with this being the most popular. This is an Arrow of Light. It's the award you get when you go from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts. I'll describe that program in detail later, but basically Cub Scouts are for elementary school kids. For people not in the USA, that's like, I don't know, school from age 5 to 10 or 11-ish. There's a thing called a crossover ceremony where you go from Cub Scouts to Boy Scouts and then you earn this knot. I have one, lots of scouts do, but if you joined in, say, middle or high school, you can't earn it. Now, most of these are training awards, but what are the actual ones that scouts can wear? Well, there's the Arrow of Light. There are religious awards, which we'll mention later on. Another cool one is the Life Saving Award. Boy Scouts who actually save someone's life can wear this. The Boy Scouts have a magazine that you get when you remember, and there's always this section called Scouts in Action where they would show examples of scouts saving people's lives, and when I was growing up and reading it, that was like my favorite part. I always thought it was so cool. In practice, I think rules on knots differ locally. Like, I don't think there's one perfect guide to all the possible knots out there, and I've seen different designs for the same award, but I might be wrong about that, to be honest. I'm not super familiar with it. I never really saw any besides the Arrow of Light in my own experience. Finally, for the front of the uniform, you can wear pins on your collar, like mine here. Also, another thing I had on my uniform that was sort of unique was a jamboree patch. You might see those as well. Keep in mind, these are not like hard rules. No one is going to take you out back and shoot you if you mess this up. There are some unique cases as well, and some people just put whatever they want on the uniform. But this is what you'll see the majority of the time. With the shoulders, these are shoulder loops. The standard olive green is what most Boy Scouts wear. There are different colors for different types of scouts and adult leaders, and under some circumstances, you're allowed to make fun ones. I know of scouts that would make some out of shotgun shells like this. I'm not sure of the legality of them, but I saw them a lot. On the right, you have the American flag and then your patrol patch. A patrol is a group of maybe 4 to 12 guys. I guess where the Boy Scout troop is a school, the patrol is like an individual class. The idea is that you're all around the same age, going through the requirements sort of in line together, and while you interact with people outside of your patrol, you also have specific patrol meetings, and you strategize together, maybe just plan events for yourselves or otherwise hang out. Usually, you would be closest with the guys in your patrol than other people in your troop. Depending on the size of the troop, new guys would either join existing patrols or would form 1 to 3 when a new class of scouts joins. But anyway, the patch itself is just like the logo for your patrol. I was a nuke bunny, and this was our patch. On the other shoulder, you have your council patch. Your council patch, or council strip, represents your council, which is a geographical unit of scouting. These are semi-independent organizations. They all follow national guidelines, but they do exhibit a degree of autonomy. Wikipedia says there are 248 of them. Below these are your troop number and patch that indicates your leadership position, so quartermaster, patrol leader, or something like that. I'll explain those in another entry. There are some other things you might see on a uniform, like an official name tag, for example, or a translator patch, but I've covered like 99% of what this stuff actually means. Famous alumni. Okay, honestly, I don't really know what I set out to accomplish with this entry. Besides, I guess I just wanted to point out how in the United States, Eagle Scout alumni often tend to be very successful. There are tons of politicians or academics or similar figures who are Eagles. And then me, of course, making Iceberg videos. Also, there's sort of an unofficial requirement that astronauts have to be Eagle Scouts, or until recently, male astronauts. 41 NASA astronauts were Eagle Scouts, and of the 24 men who flew Apollo missions from 1968 to 72, 20 of them were at least Scouts in some capacity. I'm not really sure if that trend will continue into America's future, but who knows? There are definitely some Eagle alumni like Steven Spielberg that really surprised me. There's a whole list on Wikipedia if you're interested in checking it out. William Boyce. So we talked about Robert Baden-Powell, who started scouting in general, but what about specifically in the US? To that we have William Boyce, a newspaperman who, in the early 20th century, took a break from work to pursue interests in civic affairs and exploring, going on to lead expeditions through Europe, Africa, and South America. Boyce discovered scouting in 1909 while in London, a city he passed through on his way to Africa. There's a bit of a legend about how this happened, which we'll discuss specifically on level 3 of this iceberg. Anyways, after finding scouting, he returned to America, and 4 months later, on February 8th of 1910, he founded the Boy Scouts of America, or BSA as it was called until very recently. In the beginning, it struggled a bit financially, but Boyd was a very wealthy financier who personally donated $1,000 a month to keep it going, which is about 30 grand today. Also, that bit brings up a tiny bit of information that I wanted to put on here somewhere. I didn't really have a good segue for it, but this works well enough, so I'm just gonna say it. One condition of this funding from Boyce was that Boy Scouts had to allow boys of all races and creeds to be included. There was a lot of backlash from that at the beginning, but he put his foot down on that. Now, there are a lot of legitimate criticisms you can make against the Boy Scouts in the realm of inclusion especially, but a hill that I will die on and something I'll always defend the Scouts for is that I do think they were an anti-racist organization from the very beginning. People coming from all over had always been a staple of Boy Scout membership. There were segregated troops for a while, and some troops in the South dragged their feet through the mud with desegregation, which technically lasted until 1974. But I do defend the organization for having a national policy of inclusion that really just had to conform to different parts of the US being more or less racist than others. Again, that's not acceptable, but it was also 1910 in America. I think they did a much better job than other groups like the YMCA for that time at least. Anyway, I just thought it was a fun fact to point out that Boyce really refused to budge on inclusive membership. Boyce also formed a group called Lone Scouts, which was for scouts in places too far away from troops to get requirements done, but eventually this just got absorbed into scouting. The BSA also merged with some organizations like Sons of Daniel Boone and Woodcraft Indians, which increased membership and consolidated resources. And they also had a member of the YMCA leadership named Edgar Robinson help establish an executive board for the BSA, which really helped get the organization on its feet. While Boyce himself didn't necessarily write the founding documents of scouting, he really helped get it into the States and reinforced principles of frontier survival and outdoorsmanship, and also fed a lot of Native American lore into the organization. Slogan and motto. I put this on here because there's like technically different things and there's like a dozen scout mantras overall. You've probably heard the scout motto, which is be prepared. That's kind of the classic one. They write it on everything they can. Then there's the slogan, which is do a good turn daily. Not as many people know that one. There's also the Cub Scout motto, which is do your best. Then scouts have 3 big things they have to memorize: the Scout Oath and Law and the Outdoor Code. The Scout Oath and Law have been burned into my memory. I'm not going to recite them here, but I definitely could. The Outdoor Code is about sustainability and responsibility in the outdoors. I had a funny time with it because in my troop, they never made us memorize it until like my last year there. And I remember how previously we always had to recite the Scout Oath and Law, and then they just told us that we had to recite the Outdoor Code too. And we'd get through the Oath and Law perfectly, and then someone would start leading the Outdoor Code, and it just went silent. To this day, I actually don't know what it is. So I've touched on rank, but I want to clarify how it actually works. There are 7 ranks in scouting. To start, you have the Scout rank. Getting this one is very easy and overall symbolic. Basically, you just have to memorize those mantras I mentioned earlier and maybe make a few knots or so. Then there's the tenderfoot rank. To earn your tenderfoot, you basically have to display a bunch of scouting related skills. You have to camp for the first time and then demonstrate a bunch of skills there, from basic cooking to what to do when you're lost and first aid stuff. You also have to learn how to properly handle and retire an American flag and start tracking some physical fitness measurements. You have to demonstrate some improvement in things like pull-ups and a mile time over a few months. The way you'd actually check these off was kind of fun. Everybody had a scout handbook, and basically there are sections in the back where all these requirements are listed. At any given time, either on a campout or just a weekly meeting, you could snag a leader who wasn't busy, demonstrate the thing, and then they'd just sign off it and date it. Then eventually you'd have a conference with the scoutmaster and explain everything you learned, and you'd get the award on paper. Most troops have weekly meetings, but like monthly or every other month, it would have an award ceremony attached to it, so you'd be officially presented with it then. I remember this one time, probably when I was around 15 or 16, there was this one kid in my troop, no idea who was about my age and basically just did scouting for fun and did not care about ranking up at all. And one day went from scout to tenderfoot, which is what like 10-year-olds were doing. And they presented the award to him, and like everyone collectively just lost their minds. Then you have second class, which is pretty much the same idea as tenderfoot. You demonstrate more skills, more first aid, keep tracking your fitness, and stuff like that. First class is after that. Again, more of the same, just much more advanced first aid, some boating safety, stuff like that. If you actually keep practicing all the stuff you have to learn for these ranks, you will learn so much. Like, it actually goes to show just how good of an educational program scouting is. It's phenomenal for just living your life, to be honest. Anyway, from here, there's a bit of a shift in how the ranks work. At this point, it's expected that you've learned enough basic skills outside of merit badges, and from here you get to kind of pick what your own education looks like. What happens now is that you have time and grade. Star is the next rank, and to earn it, you literally just have to spend 4 months as a first class, earn some merit badges, and hit some community service hours. Life comes after that, and the requirements are fairly similar. You have to earn more merit badges, be active for 6 months, have a leadership position, and teach other scouts some requirements, and then finally, more community service hours. Then finally, you have the Eagle Scout, which we talked about earlier. Like I said, it's both an award and a rank. And you aren't really supposed to just leave once you get Eagle. You're still allowed and very much encouraged to continue being a part of the organization. Outside of the major requirements for Eagle, like the service project, the 21 merit badges, you once again have time and grade. Troop meeting. Obviously, you all probably know that Boy Scouts hike and stuff, but like, what do they actually do? Like, what happens weekly? Well, at weekly troop meetings, Scouts meet at their organization, which is usually a church, but maybe a school or a rec center. This is just someone that they have a formal agreement with to use their space, usually in exchange for the occasional community service work around there. Here, the SPL, or Senior Patrol Leader, will generally decide what happens. However, usually all meetings feature a flag ceremony, a recitation of the Scout Oath and Law, and some announcements. Every meeting is a bit different. Some might have guest speakers, some might have workshops. It all depends on what the SPL has planned. But generally, the effort goes towards accomplishing requirements or planning weekend events. Also, there are patrol meetings where your patrol meets specifically to strategize on those things, which sort of gives some autonomy to small groups. A lot of times at troop meetings, we'd have an activity that was like half an hour, and then the remainder of the time would be for patrol meetings. So we'd maybe have a big activity together. Some little kids would get requirements, and then me and my friends would meet and talk about whatever we were going to do on the weekend. Merit badges. Finally, we get to talk about merit badges. Merit badges, in my opinion, are honestly what sets Boy Scouts apart from other youth organizations. There are currently 139 badges, though that number has fluctuated and continues to see some removals and additions and requirement changes. The most recently added merit badge was multi-sport, which is just triathlon. So what are they? How do you earn them? Why are they so cool? The thing that sets them apart, in my opinion, is just how demanding they are and the resources that are provided to help you earn them, and just how informative they can be. Each merit badge has an accompanying book, and in my opinion, they're extremely well written guides for their subject. Genuinely, I think if you wanted to learn about, say, animal husbandry, you should pick up the Merit Badge book for it. They're always extremely easy to read, and they're also always designed for someone with zero experience in the field. So again, highly recommend just picking one of these up sometime to take a look at a given subject. Broadly, merit badges come in a few categories. There are the Eagle required ones, which are sort of traditional and generally embody scouting as a whole: self-sufficiency, outdoorsmanship, athletics, etc. With a few of the Eagle required ones, you actually get a choice of what you do. For example, you can choose between sustainability or environmental science, or you can choose between swimming and cycling. Then there are other categories like careers. You have merit badges for jobs requiring tons of education, like law or dentistry, but you also have, say, automotive maintenance or plumbing. Some are related to hobbies like coin collecting, gardening, animation, and genealogy. Some are related to history or like general academic education, such as Indian lore. There are athletic ones like whitewater, and then there are some which are genuinely random. I earned railroading, which was informative, but not something I would have learned otherwise. That was actually probably one of my funniest scouting memories. The guy who taught the class literally dressed up as a railroader, like had overalls and like a striped shirt, like he was pulled straight from Thomas the Tank Engine. And he came up to us and he like leaned over the table like this, sort of made eye contact, and he was like, "Do you know what the most dangerous job in the world is?" And so we're thinking like, oh, maybe I don't know, like a marine, an underwater railroading. And then he kind of like trauma dumped on us about like what happens when kids play near railroads and stuff. But guy was really into trains. It was honestly, it was a ton of fun. I loved it. Usually people only earn around the required 21 merit badges, if they are sticking through the program, of course. But there are tons of scouts who go above and beyond and sometimes even earn all of them, which is insane. If you wanted to do that, scouting would probably be like your only high school activity, if I'm being honest. Merit badges were one of my favorite parts of scouting as a whole. They really encouraged me to try new things and get outside of my comfort zone. Sometimes during a meeting, a specialist in some career would host a merit badge class, or there were big conventions where you could sign up in advance for a few classes. And if you completed any prerequisites, you might be able to get like several in one weekend. Because you have to do a few random ones of your choosing for Eagle Scout, you get exposed to careers that you might never have considered or hobbies you might never have tried, which is just super cool. I think earning those is probably the thing I miss most about, no longer being a scout. To actually earn them, you have to have a qualified merit badge counselor sign off on what's called a blue card. So you usually meet this person on your own time and present all that you've learned or done. Being a merit badge counselor simply requires that you know a lot about the subject or you're somehow qualified, like maybe it's your career. My dad, for example, is an attorney, so he was a counselor for the law merit badge. But what do you do if you're trying to get someone to sign off on, say, landscape architecture, for example? Well, part of the growth and teaching, something that once again makes these such useful tools for career preparation and learning, is that you have to seek this person out. They're generally a registry of counselors in your area, but I remember having to email these strangers and schedule meetings with them. Which, when you're like 13, that is actually a skill you have to practice, writing emails or letters or whatnot. It was sort of like a junior introduction to networking in that regard, and that's a really unique aspect of the learning. As much as I hate using LinkedIn when I message people on there, that's basically what I was doing to get merit badge counselors, if that puts it into perspective at all. Merit badges are truly integral to scouting, and there's lots of interesting lore behind some specific ones in particular, so we're going to keep touching on them throughout the video. Leave no trace. Leave no trace is another mantra drilled into scouts. I always knew it was like a colloquial expression about proper endorsementship, but I also thought it was specifically a scouting thing. But it's actually an organization in and of itself. It's intrinsically connected to scouting, and we talk about it all the time, but it's actually like a separate program. It's also the name of a documentary about the abuse scandal that the organization faced. We'll talk about that later on. Leadership positions. So previously, I mentioned leadership positions. or at least where the patch goes on your uniform. Leadership positions, while technically optional, are another integral part of troop function. Ideally, every troop would have enough scouts that all of these positions are filled, and then some people don't have positions, so there's actually some competition to be elected. But in practice, it all depends on troop size. Senior patrol leader is the #1 leader of the troop. They are essentially responsible for opening and closing meetings, running them, and really doing anything you could expect a 16 to 18-year-old to do in terms of planning. Depending on the scoutmaster and the type of troop you have, they have more or less power in practice. If you have a bad adult leader, they would just tell you what to do and run the show behind the scenes. But generally, if you have a good leader, you have a lot of flexibility as an SPL. There are also ASPLs, or Assistant Senior Patrol Leaders, who are supposed to be older scouts who just fill a leadership role. Again, this all depends on how your individual troop functions. I personally, the last scoutmaster I had was phenomenal. He was the type of guy to gently encourage or discourage, and he'd even let you fail, even if it meant failing the entire 40-person meeting, which was a phenomenal set of lessons for me at that time. There's also the patrol leader, who leads those small groups I talked about earlier. Occasionally, scout meetings would break out into patrol meetings, so they would lead those. They also plan activities just for the patrol. Personally, my patrol and I did a ton of stuff that was just us. In practice, it should be a group of like 6 or 7 friends, so you might not necessarily be telling them what to do, but you are technically tasked with making sure you guys actually sort of get something done instead of just playing around. Also, if, for example, an SPL and then all the SPLs were incapacitated, I'm pretty sure the oldest patrol leader would be in charge. Next is the troop guide, someone who's supposed to lead younger scouts who have just joined and integrate them into the troop. Then there's the quartermaster, who's responsible for tracking the use and maintenance of troop gear, like tents or cook sets. Usually before a camp out, you'd check out stuff from them, and they'd have to inspect it before you checked it back in. The scribe is described as a troop secretary. They attend meetings, including the Patrol Leaders Council, where patrol leaders, SPLs, and ASPLs meet to lead the troop, and document the contents of the meeting, as well as troop meetings in general. Depending on what the size or needs of the troop are, they might also write materials or invitations or speeches or whatnot. Then there's the Den Chief, who goes to Cub Scout meetings and shows the younger scouts cool stuff, with the main focus being getting them to decide to continue staying in the program, joining Boy Scouts after their time in Cub Scouts ends. Then there's the chaplain's aide, who is supposed to assist the adult chaplain if you have one. They usually give these prayers before meetings. I'll explain how religion and scouting works in general later on, but they give those types of prayers that are, dedicated to the great spirit of the sky or just whatever you want to pray to. The historian is similar to the scribe in that they take note of things, but they basically document troop history, maybe occasionally making visual media or scrapbooks or slideshows or whatever, but also preserving trophies and any photographs or anything cool like that. The instructor is tasked with teaching younger scouts trying to earn ranks like Tenderfoot how to actually do the things they have to do, so not tying, first aid, whatever. Often you'll have more than one, and they should hopefully specialize in the type of things that they enjoy more personally. The librarian is in charge of book-related materials to the troop, effectively a quartermaster for media. In practice, librarians pretty much just handle the troop's reserve of merit badge books, so you check them out to people and stuff like that. The webmaster maintains a troop website. There is a general troop website, I don't know how to describe it, like a sample website type that most troops use, but if you're into coding, you could totally just make your own, like a completely unique one. Bugler plays the bugle, or a similar wind instrument. Often you don't have a bugler because, you need someone who actually knows how to play the instrument. There is a bugling merit badge, and bugling is often used at big events to signal things like lunchtime or morning or whatever. I only remember us having a bugler one time, and it was this middle schooler who had a trumpet, and it was awful to listen to. It really was, but he did his best at flag ceremonies and stuff like that. The OA representative is a liaison between their troop and their Order of the Arrow Lodge. The outdoor ethics guide is sort of like a master of leave no trace education. And finally, the junior assistant scoutmaster is supposed to be, well, an assistant to the scoutmaster. This is sort of a retirement plan for SPLs. The idea here is that an older scout, preferably an ex-senior patrol leader, now works on functions that don't face the scouts. So the more adult things behind the scenes, like how do you pay for an event? How do you drive people to an event? Boring stuff like that. I started as a den chief and ended up as a librarian, an assistant patrol leader, an assistant SPL, and then eventually an SPL. Forms of scouting. So for this whole video, besides explaining Cub Scouts and Lone Scouts, I've kind of worked under the assumption that there's just scouts. But it is a bit more complicated. The main group I've been talking about this whole time are scouts, or members of Scouts BSA. When I started, they were called Boy Scouts, but now they are just scouts. This is where the bulk of scouting membership lies. And this is what you're probably thinking of when you hear the term Boy Scout. And for 99% of the information I'm talking about today, this is the program I'm referring to. Scouts are usually between the ages of 10 or 11 up until 18 when they are officially kicked out. Cub Scouts are 5 to 10-year-olds, or elementary schoolers, who get a taste of scouting before deciding to stay in. I had a fantastic time as a Cub Scout. It was so much fun. Instead of merit badges, you earn belt loops. Instead of ranks, you just progress by each grade of elementary school, going from Tiger to Wolf to Bear to Weeb 1 to Weeb 2. Weeb stands for Weebelows, which in and of itself is a portmanteau of We Be Loyal Scout. My favorite thing in Cub Scouts was easily making Pinewood Derby cars. This was an annual thing, at least for us, where you would design a car that came in this box kit and then you'd race it. There were always awards for both the best looking and fastest cars. I always went for aesthetic. I never made like a super fast car. One year, the theme of my car was bacon. I literally just like made it into a strip of bacon, which was cool, but I took it one step farther. For whatever reason, I had a thing of bacon flavored chapstick, and like I rubbed it all over the car. It was sticky, it smelled, and it drove my dog absolutely crazy, but it was cool. I'm pretty sure I won something that year. Also, if you wanted to make them faster, you'd have to add some weight to them. So basically, you have a very small thing and you have to put something in it that's heavy for its size, you know? So almost every year, my dad and I would drill holes in the car and put 45 caliber bullets in it and then just cover it with putty and then paint right over it. There were other events like rain gutter regattas, which is basically the same thing but with boats. Overall, it was a phenomenal experience. I got my first pocket knives in Cub Scouts, and also, not related at all, my first small scars from pocket knives in Cub Scouts. Great program, honestly, 10 out of 10. So what about older scouts? Scouts too old for Boy Scouts, or just scouts? God, this is so confusing. At age 14, you can join Venturing Scouts, which is a program that lasts until you're 21. The basic idea with venturing is that you get to stay in for your college years, and while there are some awards for venturing, you don't really have requirements or assigned learning, just fun with friends if you want to keep being in the program. I was a venturer on paper, but I never really got a uniform or anything. I just remember my friends and I grilled or shot guns every once in a while. It was pretty much just friends hanging out, for me at least. There are also explorers. These are kind of interesting. Exploring is a program in the United States which I took part of, but at the time I had no idea it was owned by Scouting America. Exploring is where you join a group that exposes kids to a particular career interest. I was a law enforcement explorer, so basically I went to meetings where my police department would show high schoolers what it was like to be police. Most of the time we were just free laborers for community events, which was, a ton of fun. It got me outside and I made a ton of friends there. It was also really fun. Every once in a while, they'd throw us a bone and give us some airsoft guns and let us clear rooms. There are a ton of variants though. There's aviation, fire, and other skilled trades. Now, they're either a partner or owned by Scouting, something like that. They're fundamentally different, but very much related. I wouldn't exactly call it a Scouting program, but I might call it a program of Scouting. Then there are Sea Scouts. Sea Scouts might be the rarest of the bunch. I remember seeing one or two in my whole scouting career at big events and being so confused with what they were. Sea Scouts meet at a ship instead of a troop. They have their own structure, leadership roles, something called the Sea Promise, and all this stuff I have zero familiarity with. Naturally, they only exist where water does, and I do not come from somewhere like that. Earlier, I mentioned Lone Scouts. Lone Scouts do exist, they're just not completely separate from the BSA or Scouting America anymore. These are for scouts who live very far beyond any troop. There exists a set of guidelines as to how they can learn as a lone scout, and it involves a lot of help from their parents. Now, this is slightly different from Boyce's original Lone Scouts organization, which had 30,000 members, no age limit, and involved a lot more Native American lore and sending mail, it was kind of about correspondence, oddly enough. But like I said, that merged with the BSA in 1923. I've never met a Lone Scout, but I do know that they exist in small numbers to this day. There also were Varsity Scouts, but that program ended in 2017. Originally, they kind of existed as a more athletic program that Boy Scouts can join. It didn't really have a major role in scouting though, and it just fizzled out. Effectively, venturing accomplished the same thing and more, so it just kind of went away. I never actually met a Varsity Scout, but they were very much associated with the LDS Church, or Mormons. Their role in scouting is massive, and we will discuss it in full in a later entry. Also, just a bit of information with the whole girls joining Boy Scouts thing. Girls were always allowed to join a lot of the organizations I've described. They just couldn't join Cub Scouts, Varsity Scouts, and Boy Scouts. They were always allowed to join Sea Scouts and venturing. Again, Boy Scouts no longer exists and is just Scouts, but for 2020, those were the rules. So there were girls in venturing, Sea Scouting, that was very common. It was just that they couldn't join Boy Scouts and therefore couldn't earn the coveted Eagle Scout rank. Moving on to level 3, we're going to start with the Tale of the Unknown Scout. So I mentioned that Boyce formed the BSA after going to London, but why? Well, there's a legend, which I'll tell, and then there's also the variation that most likely actually happened. Reading directly from Wikipedia, the story goes, William Boyce was lost on a foggy street in London in 1909 when an unknown scout came to his aid, guiding him to his destination. Boyce offered a tip, but the boy refused, explaining that he was a Boy Scout and was merely doing his daily good turn. Soon thereafter, Boyce met with General Baden-Powell, who was chief scout at the time. Boyce returned to America and 4 months later founded the Boy Scouts of America on February 8, 1910. Now, there is some truth to this, but it's likely exaggerated. There probably wasn't even fog on that day, for example, but Boyce did encounter a scout like this. The fog part comes from a 1911 story about a man in Rhode Island being guided on a foggy day by a scout, and James West, the first Chief Scout executive, added it to the story. Anyway, with Boyce, the encounter did convince him to seek out and meet Baden-Powell after asking the scout for the address of the scouting headquarters. After taking the original book and whatever he learned back to the US, he started scouting there. Scouting for Boys. Scouting for Boys was the original scouting manual that I've mentioned a few times in the video, and while it was for scouting in the UK and not the USA, it was foundational for scouting as a whole, so many of the things most characteristic of the scouting spirit came from that book right there. Scouting for Boys was a rewrite of Aids to Scouting. Aids to Scouting taught basic military skills, but ended up being popular amongst 12 to 15-year-old boys. Perhaps in part because during the Siege of Mafeking, where Baden-Powell fought, boys of that age were recruited for assistance, carrying wounded and being messengers. After coming back from the war, Baden-Powell decided it needed revision. The new edition included much of that military training and spirit, but drew from other sources such as the birch bark roll of the Woodcraft Indians. There was a lot of information about actual scouting, like stalking, tracking, and hiding, but also information on camping, hygiene, discipline, patriotism, and how to help out during emergencies. Certainly stuff that would help enlisted personnel, but a little bit more general. All of this was basically replicated in American scouting, though with less and less reference towards military training over time. But most of the frontiersman training stayed. Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell, who lived from 1894 to 1978, was an American painter and illustrator renowned for his depictions of American culture and everyday life. Rockwell had a 64-year association with the BSA, during which he produced numerous covers for their publication, Boys Life, which is now called Scout's Life, the scouting magazine, as well as calendars and other illustrations that encapsulated the essence of scouting. His paintings in general are iconic staples of Americana that really capture what it was like to live in the country during that time. But his scouting paintings in particular are also very famous. Some of his most famous works involving scouting are The Scoutmaster, A Scout is Reverent, and A Guiding Hand. I've always liked this one called Can't Wait, which shows a Cub Scout wearing presumably his older brother's uniform. To this day, the original paintings are literally sold for millions and millions of dollars. Boys Life. Boys Life, now Scout's Life, is a scouting magazine that's been around since 1911. It came included with your Boy Scout membership fees, so like everyone got it, and to be honest, it was a ton of fun. It was full of comics, but also things about video games and just like cool stuff that had come out. It was less a scouting magazine, honestly, and more just a fun magazine for boys at the time. Various famous writers, including Isaac Asimov, wrote for it. There was a lot about exercising and also exceptionally great Boy Scout trips and Eagle projects. From what I remember, it was really cool. Classic skits. Skits and theater in general is a major part of scouting. It's expected that at campouts or whatever, you'll perhaps have competitions to make like the funniest bit. Some say this came from the tradition of Baden-Powell actually being a spy, so being able to come up with a cover story was important, but I don't know if that's actually true or not. You could come up with your own skit, of course, but you could always rely on some of the classics. The number one is, without a doubt, The Invisible Bench. You might have seen this outside of Scouts, like at a summer camp or something, but I have seen The Invisible Bench played about 100 times in my scouting career. The way it goes, if you've never heard of it, is that a guy goes and kind of holds a squat, like this, and then someone else comes and asks what he's doing, to which the first one replies, "I'm sitting on an invisible bench. What about you?" And the guy goes, "Oh, cool, I'll sit with you." You repeat this pattern as many times as you want, and then finally the last guy goes, "Oh, I moved it last week," and then everyone just falls. The thing is, you can have as many people as you want do this. The funniest invisible bench I ever saw in my life was probably when, I don't know when this specifically happened, but we basically had every single kid at a campout do it. Probably like 20 or more of us, to the point where the invisible bench had 2 rows. And someone would come up and you'd think, surely it's done now, like it's over. And then they'd say the exact same thing you've heard 20 times in a row. Another classic is the Buffalo Poop skit. The skit starts with one scout, the explorer, walking onto the stage, pretending to examine something on the ground, looking at it closely. He then declares it is buffalo poop. Another scout comes up and sniffs it, once again declaring it smells like buffalo poop. Then someone comes along and tastes it, saying it tastes like buffalo poop. They all look at each other and say that since it's buffalo poop, they're glad they didn't step in it, with the joke being that, sure, they didn't step in it, but like they put it in their mouth. The funniest part was never the punchline, it was how many people you could add to the pattern and like what characteristic you could add to the buffalo poop. To start, you had, the 5 senses, but you could also like grab an invisible thermometer and be like, this is the precise temperature of buffalo poop. Or whatever you would come up with. There's a lot of variation, I'm sure, but that's how we did it. There are also a ton of anti-jokes. There's this one in particular, I think it's called The Story of the Big Purple Elephant or something like that, where like, I don't even remember exactly how it went, but basically you told this really long, obnoxious story that took like 5 minutes to tell, and then at the very end, there's about to be a big reveal, and then the character just gets hit by a bus. And then you're like, the moral of the story is to look both ways before you cross the street. These get to be very tired, but it's really fun when you're with a bunch of your friends, to be honest. Jamboree. A scout jamboree is a large gathering of scouts from different places designed to celebrate the spirit of scouting. These events are massive, with outdoor adventure activities, cultural exchange, leadership training, and service projects. The National Scout Jamboree is held in the US every 4 years, bringing together tens of thousands of scouts from across the United States. First held in 1937 in Washington, D.C., it's now held at the Summit Bechtel Reserve in West Virginia. There's all sorts of fun things to do, but also tons of famous speakers and cool events. The president usually shows up to these as well. Jamborees exist internationally. The World Scout Jamboree is the largest international scouting event held every 4 years by the World Organization of Scout Movement to promote global scouting. It was first held in England, but it's grown to include tens of thousands of scouts from over 170 countries. It's always hosted by a different country, featuring adventure activities, global projects, and, like I said, cultural exchange. There's also regional jamborees such as the Euro Jamboree, the Asia Pacific Jamboree, and the Pan American Jamboree. Same idea, just on a continental scale. This is like the Woodstock of scouting. They're basically massive campouts. I went to the World Jamboree in 2019 when it was hosted in the US. I only went for a day though because it was pretty expensive to actually camp there. But it was a cool event. We've now arrived at level 4, and we'll begin this with Baden-Powell's espionage career. During his army career, Baden-Powell served briefly as a spy. His experiences in espionage are detailed in his book, My Adventures as a Spy, where he recounts covert operations during the Second Boer War. Baden-Powell used disguises, made diversions, and concealed messages to gather intelligence behind enemy lines. Notably, he used semaphore signaling, a method of conveying information at a distance using visual signals to encode messages. But he put a fascinating twist on them. He would embed these signals into drawings and taught others to do so as well. He pretended to be an avid butterfly watcher while in Dalmatia, and he'd draw these butterflies, which were full of codes. I have not read that book, to be honest, but I flipped through it to write this script, and it looked pretty interesting, so I recommend you check it out. It's free online. Nuclear Boy Scout. This is a meme you might actually have heard of outside of Boy Scouts. I put it on here because I think it's funny he's come to be referred to as that. David Hahn, or the Nuclear Boy Scout, was a 17-year-old Eagle Scout from Michigan, so obsessed with chemistry and atomic energy that he decided to make a nuclear reactor in his mom's backyard shed. David scavenged radioactive materials from everyday items like smoke detectors and clocks, piecing together a makeshift neutron source with the goal of creating a reactor capable of producing fissile material. Sadly for him, he never pulled it off because police pulled him over for an unrelated incident and found the nuclear material in his car. The Wikipedia article for this guy states that after Hahn warned him that the material was radioactive, the police called the feds because they thought he had an atomic bomb. Definitely a reaction of all time. This happened in 1994, and after the EPA cleanup, the madman was able to get his Eagle Scout. Hahn went on to be a Marine and a sailor, but his interest in chemistry didn't stop there. In 2007, the FBI received a tip that there was another neutron source in his freezer. So they called him up, and he promised that he didn't have any radioactive material. However, they did try and get an interview with him. During the conversation with police, Hahn explained that he was seeing prostitutes, using cocaine, was not taking his schizophrenia medication, and was very preoccupied by people who could shock his balls with their mind. Later that year, he got caught stealing smoke detectors from his building, presumably to do the exact same thing he did years before, and in his mugshot, he was apparently covered in sores which likely indicated exposure to radioactive material. Unfortunately, in 2016, he passed away as a result of a mix of intoxication from fentanyl, alcohol, and DPH. He made a pretty large impact on pop culture with references to him appearing all over. Also, in 2003, he personally reenacted some scenes from the story for a documentary on the subject. Other highest ranks. In the other forms of scouting, there are also pinnacle ranks, which are maybe just as difficult as earning the Eagle Scout, but they're certainly more obscure and haven't received the same prestige over time. In Cub Scouts, the closest thing to a highest award would be the Arrow of Light that we mentioned earlier. It does have requirements, but since you're so young, the adults usually just manage you earning them, and you basically just get it by graduating the 5th grade. In venturing, the highest rank is the Summit rank, which is earned by going on 7 activities, doing some community service, being a leader in your venturing crew, and completing a structured personal reflection. In Sea Scouts, the highest rank is the Quartermaster Award, which is earned by leading a discussion on the Sea Promise, leading an overnight cruise, and completing the 8 special skills, amongst a few other things. In Varsity Scouts, the highest award was the Denali Award, which is earned by ranking up in Boy Scouts or getting a palm if you were already an Eagle. High Adventure. High Adventure is easily one of the coolest parts of American Scouting. High Adventure bases are basically super cool campgrounds where you have more difficult than average experiences. Usually in a scout's career, you'll only do one. It's typically more expensive and a big deal in general, And from what I remember, most people go to Philmont. I'll identify them though, and it'll start to make more sense. First off, there are the Northern Tier bases, or just Northern Tier, a series of campgrounds in Minnesota and Canada around a town called Ely. There's a lot of canoeing here, but the real high adventure experience to go on is the winter dog sledding, which is what I did. Then there's Philmont, a massive scout camp capped by the tooth of time where scouts can go on massive hikes between 50 to 120 miles. After that is Sea Base, or Florida Sea Base, where you do boating activities and scuba, with the capstone trip being a sailing trip from the Bahamas back to Florida. Then finally, there's Bechtel Reserve, or the Paul R. Christen National High Adventure Base in the Summit Bechtel Family National Scout Reserve. This one is a bit different than the others in that there's not really a major theme like the other three, whereas you could categorize them as, say, land, ice, water. This one's basically just a cool campground with a ton of fun activities. So what exactly are these? Well, they're places, right? These are high adventure bases, but the phrase is kind of a noun in and of itself, like scouts can say, I'm going on high adventure. Going on one of these involves picking a program. For example, at Philmont, there's different hiking routes. At Northern Tier, you can decide to go when the lake is frozen or not. You can camp in a yurt or just outside. And then at Sea Base, you pick from whatever water activity you want to do. Every experience is a bit different. Bechtel is also where the national jamborees are held now. Like I said, I went there in 2019 for the International Jamboree, so I have been to the campsite, but I've never actually slept there. I did, however, do Northern Tier, which was easily one of the coolest things I've ever done. To this day, I still talk about it with my friends. I went on a program called Ukpik, which is Inuit for snow owl. My patrol and I, plus my dad and a friend's dad, all spent a long weekend in Ely dog sledding. We had 3 sleds with 18 dogs in total. I'd never experienced working dogs like that before. We had to take care of them and work with them, which was just a phenomenal experience. One of the dogs had ran the Iditarod, which is a very prestigious dog sledding race. They were just like insanely athletic. We went out with 2 guides and we learned about Inuit culture while camping and sledding and hiking. I have so many stories from that time. It literally got to be about negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit. It was absolutely freezing. They told us if we had to go to the bathroom that you had to do it in an empty bag of chips and take it back with you because it was too cold for your waste to degrade. I remember the working out and the cold just made us feel insanely tired and hungry. More tired and hungry than I had ever felt before, easily. One night, to surprise us, while we had all basically gotten in our sleeping bags, the instructor boiled some water and put those applesauce packets in it and brought it to us. And like, we were craving so much sugar. Like it was, I don't think I've ever tasted anything more delicious than that hot applesauce when I was out there. Like, I was so cold and so hungry. To get water, we had to drill through the ice and then take it out and boil it. That's also how we heated up the dog's food. We had this dry meat and we'd mix it with the water to feed them. This one dog, I don't remember his name, but he was an absolute little bastard. And he didn't like his food watery at all, so we would give him his bowl and he would immediately look you right in the eyes, pick it up, and then just throw it like straight in the air and eat the little bits that had fallen. Easily though, it was a top 3 weekend ever. Amazing times. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Order of the Arrow. The Order of the Arrow, or just OA, is an organization within Scouts. It's also basically a cult. Originally called WWW, or Wemachendiek Wingolausik Whitman Witahem, I don't even know. The OA is the Honor Society of Scouting, again, the Boy Scout component, where exemplary scouts are nominated to join the group and then go to the initiation. In practice, basically, when you get to be 14 or 15, you can go to the initiation. If you pass it, you become a brother or an arrowman. The OA originated as an unauthorized experiment by Edward Goodman, a major leader and shaper of early scouting in America. In 1948, it was officially adopted by the BSA as a program within Boy Scouts. When it was originally being tested, and obviously based on the secretive nature of it, we don't know exactly what happened, it took advantage of Freemasonry and Native American lore and actually was somewhat secretive. Nowadays, it is in effect just another scouting program and fun thing where you kind of pretend to have a difficult initiation and have some watered down initiation stuff. There's no actual secrecy or hazing. If you join OA, you join the local lodge, and you wear that lodge patch I mentioned earlier. You also get an OA sash, which looks pretty cool. I was in the OA, but I was kind of what they refer to as a sash and dash because I did the initiation and then nothing else, which I regret because it is a cool group. But honestly, I was just aging out at the time. Now, technically, though parents have the right to know what will happen, the initiation weekend is very secret. But since you guys are awesome SeedButter subscribers, I'll tell you what happened. To be initiated, at least when I was, there were a few requirements. Basically, you had to sleep under the stars, so you slept like with no tent, just on the sleeping bag on the grass. When I did it, there were like 100 of us just in a circle sleeping. Then the main day, which is usually just Saturday if it's a weekend campout, you have a full day of labor with scant food while maintaining silence the entire time. When I did it, there wasn't actually much labor that the camp needed, so the leaders basically divided us into groups, and my group was tasked with clearing bush from a hiking trail. So we basically just cut down trees and played with saws. I remember specifically because really we didn't have anything to do that I kind of walked off from the group a little bit, and I found this tree that was like, I don't know, that wide. I thought surely it's not going to be like that long, and I just took me like 45 minutes. I took a hacksaw to it, and eventually it came down, and it was like a massive tree. Like it knocked other things down with it. It was really loud. We had to spend the next hour like cutting it into pieces and throwing it into the woods. The only thing that was really difficult was the food thing. In the morning, we had a single hard-boiled egg, and at lunch, we had a single hot dog. But if you made it till the evening, there was a huge feast, which was a ton of fun. If you do stay in OA, unlike me, you can earn a Vigil honor, an award bestowed upon you after 2 years of distinguished lodge service. Now, the OA actually had a lot of controversy for a while, as any secret fraternity organization in the US typically does. You have to be elected by the troop to join, so there can be a little bit of a popularity contest. Also, it is technically like secret. There is an established process for parents to supervise the ceremony if they want, but the fact that you even have to do that in the first place is just worrisome to some people. When OA became official, they had to make a lot of effort to distance themselves from Freemasonry, but some terms like lodge stayed. There's a lot of articles around the prevailing Freemason influence though, and some say that it isn't all gone. Another thing that happened a lot while I was in, but is sort of becoming discouraged today, is people would dress up as Native Americans. This happened a lot more in the OA than Boy Scouts in general. The general problem was that there was never any effort to be factual about the presentation of the Native American culture. It was more just like some guy dressed up as an Indian. There is a full entry about that later on in the Iceberg. I don't believe there's anything wrong with the OA, though I'm not the guy to ask because I never really participated. I joined as I was sort of leaving scouting and getting older anyways. Nowadays, at least my perception of it is that it's trying to be a little edgy and cool and give kids a fun experience and sort of a feeling of secrecy. It ends up just aggregating devoted scouts in one location, pulling from multiple troops so that those scouts can go on more advanced camping trips or do more advanced service projects or whatnot, which kind of makes sense. After all, it is the honor society of scouting. Land sale. Because of a couple of actors, but primarily the massive payout needed for the sexual abuse scandal in scouting, the scouts had to sell off a lot of properties. The BSA were easily one of the largest landowners in the US, especially when you include the distribution system because of councils having some autonomy. Collectively, the BSA owned over 2,000 properties. In New York State alone, they owned 35,000 acres of property, and then there's Philmont, which itself is over 140,000 acres of land. They owned a lot of land. Most of this land was used for campgrounds and summer camps, but much of it had to be sold off to pay for the abuse fund, which totaled $2.46 billion. Not only was land sold off, but artwork as well, including many of those Norman Rockwell paintings I mentioned earlier. A lot of people were pretty disappointed that it reduced opportunities for recreation and stuff for kids, but to be honest, it pales in comparison to the sort of justice that the survivors needed. I think it sucks, but it was a necessary thing to do. I don't think there exists like a perfect repository of what was sold that's publicly available, but local councils were required to come up with $515 million to help alleviate the bankruptcy, so about a fifth of the total fund. Some camps were bought out by developers, others saved by conservation groups. For example, a nonprofit purchased the 252-acre Deer Lake Scout Reserve for $4.75 million. It sucks that that had to happen, but at least a lot of the land was preserved somewhat and people can still enjoy and explore it. My council was able to remain relatively unscathed. There was one campground I grew up with, which had a sliver of it sold, but I think that was for an unrelated reason. To be fair, some of the land wasn't even being used, so if other organizations can take care of it and get people outside, great. But yeah, that process as a whole has led to a lot of beloved camps dying out. It makes sense why, but it does suck. Patent filing and hardest requirements. Okay, so this is sort of about two things. I wanted to talk about absurdly hard requirements, but there's also one in particular that is insane. That is, of course, having to secure a patent. From 1911 to 1917, there was an invention merit badge. It was only earned 10 documented times before it was discontinued. Part of the reason why was because you literally had to secure a patent to get it. We know of at least one of these patents. One scout patented a scout uniform with a false sleeve so you could protect your patches from getting dirty on a campout or something like that. We also know that Stephen Porter got one, as he was the first scout to earn every single merit badge, completing the feat in 1922. We don't actually know what he patented though. So yeah, there are these like 8 mystery scouting patents out there, and we aren't 100% positive what they all are. In 2010, the merit badge was revived, this time as inventing instead of invention. Nowadays, you just have to talk about patents instead of actually earning one. Now, besides that, no other requirement is unfeasible. They become difficult either in being tedious or requiring long-term work, or requiring a specialized skill or degree of physical fitness. Bugling, or music, for example, is really going to suck if you don't play an instrument. The backpacking merit badge also requires backpacking 30 miles. The cycling badge requires riding 50, and swimming requires you to retrieve a sunken brick from a pool. These are all going to suck if you're not fit. Many merit badges also love to make you track progress over something like the course of 3 months. For example, with personal fitness and personal management, you have to track workouts and a budget over that length of time. With merit badges too, you'll often have the opportunity to pick from, say, up to 3 options to fulfill one requirement, and it might be more or less accessible depending on where you live or whatnot. For example, with coin collecting, you have the option to visit a US mint. That's going to suck if you live in Hawaii, but there are other options. Most of it just boils down to accessibility. In practice, certain merit badges are almost always earned at jamborees or camps where certain things are available. For example, with aviation, you either need a flight simulator or an actual aircraft to inspect. If you don't have these things, it is going to suck. While some of these things are very hard to do, I will say scouting as a whole is pretty good with providing options for people who can't get to a camp or a place where that's available. Like, if you really want to do it, it can somehow be made possible. But if you don't prepare in advance, a lot of these can really suck. Membership decline. Scouting in the US has been on the decline for quite a while. That's due to a ton of factors. I mean, broadly, this is unsubstantiated. I haven't actually checked this out, but I think on the whole, kids go outside much less than they did 20 years ago. There's more entertaining things to do indoors now, and perhaps more crucially, there exists more exploitation of attention spans that keep people indoors, whether it's algorithms or microtransactions or gambling or whatnot. I say as I make a video to be, watched inside while gaming or whatever. I'm part of the problem. But there are actually some specific things that Boy Scouts have done to shoot themselves in the foot. If you look at this membership graph, we can see that some of it isn't even modern. The first mass exodus was actually here in 1973. That year, the BSA implemented something called the Improved Scouting Program, which was a set of initiatives designed to reduce how much scouting happened outdoors and make it more applicable to an urban setting, in an effort to hopefully attract more people. Now, I don't know if I hate that idea in theory. I don't get the opportunity to camp that much, and I can say with certainty that I don't necessarily use all of the camping or backpacking skills that I learned in scouting, but I definitely budget, communicate, fix things around my house, whatnot. Those were things I learned in scouting. Again, I love being outside, but I've had more meetings and seminars and coffee chats than I've ever tied knots, so I do see it both ways. I really do appreciate the pre-professional training that scouting provides. There's not a lot of good research on the effects of the ISP. There were a lot of changes that were later undone, but also major steps towards teaching more conservation and environmental friendliness. However good as those intentions might have been though, they massively contributed to a big exodus in scouting. The main consensus I've seen online is that it removed so much emphasis from being in the outdoors that people were less interested. Then here in 2019, you could see where the LDS Church, or the Mormons, left scouting. Basically, after the Boy Scouts removed the ban on LGBT leaders, and around the same time the sex abuse scandal was starting to come to a head, the LDS Church ended their partnership with Scouting and eventually formed their own organization. There were about 400,000 Mormon Scouts who left during that time, so with each of them paying membership dues, you can imagine this was a big blow to the BSA. On top of that, Scouting nowadays seems to alienate a lot of people. You have a more progressive crowd who still associates Scouting with an older time, and then you have a more conservative crowd that's unhappy with some of the more liberal progressive measures that have been taken. People think it's too antiquated or too soft, and regardless of whether or not that's true, everyone ends up unhappy. It's generally a crisis for the organization. However, there has been some good news that membership might be seeing an uptick, so it's perhaps not an apocalyptic scenario, and hopefully Scouting will see some degree of a comeback in the following years. Competing groups. During the formation of the Boy Scouts of America, there was a lot of wrestling between youth groups to see who would kind of come out on top. Obviously, we know that the Boy Scouts of America won, but who exactly were those original competitors? And what about modern ones too? Well, to start, one rival organization that popped up around the very early days of BSA's history was the American Boy Scouts. The American Boy Scouts, not to be confused with the Boy Scouts of America, was formed in 1910 by a rival of boys, another newspaper mogul. If I had a nickel for every time a newspaper man wanted to start an outdoorsy youth organization, I would have 2 nickels. Not a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. The American Boy Scouts were extremely mismanaged. People fundraised and then kept a lot of the money that was supposed to go to the organization. The founder himself actually resigned, along with much of the original leadership, in the same year the group was formed. At some point, an American Boy Scout shot and killed another American Boy Scout, and just a year after that happened, and perhaps the most genius marketing stunt I've seen in my entire life, Remington Arms sold a rifle branded for the organization called the 4S Boy Scout Rifle. The New England division of the organization, citing said mismanagement, left the group in 1910, forming the New England Boy Scouts, which lasted until 1916, at which point they merged with the BSA. The same exact thing happened in 1911 with the Rhode Island division, who became Rhode Island Boy Scouts, though they made it until 1917 before they joined the real guys. The American Boy Scouts were constantly compared to and mixed up with Boy Scouts of America, eventually changing their name to the United States Boy Scouts, or USBS. They were a lot more militaristic than the BSA, actively doing army drills and selling war bonds. Remember, much of the army stuff for the BSA was more about being a frontiersman and living out on the colonies than actually fighting in wars. They kept up this militaristic label, changing their names twice to the American Cadets and then the U.S. Junior Military Forces, until eventually dissolving throughout the 1920s. In 1919, they were actually barred from using the term scout in any official capacity by the New York Supreme Court after the BSA requested an injunction. They weren't the only early rivals of the BSA, though. In 1910, other groups such as the Woodcraft Indians, the Boy Pioneers, the National Highway Patrol Association of Scouts, and the National Scouts of America voluntarily decided to merge with the BSA. There were also the Life Saving Guards Boys, which joined the BSA in 1929. The Boy Rangers of America, founded in 1913 for younger kids, eventually became the basis for Cub Scouts in 1930, joining the umbrella organization of the BSA. Why I really put this on the iceberg is to truly explain to you guys that Scouting is a movement. It's an international movement where Scouting for Boys, written by Baden-Powell, is effectively the Bible of Scouting. However, in different countries and at different times, that original foundation has been interpreted and reinterpreted in dozens of different ways. To this day, the Boy Scouts of America, now known as Scouting America, are the biggest scouting organization out there, but remember, it is a worldwide movement which began in the UK. There's nothing to suggest any primacy of Scouting America, besides the fact that it's the biggest. But we weren't the first, and there's nothing stopping anyone from making their own organization today. Maybe you'll have some copyright problems here and there because of how big Scouting America is, but in general, it would work. So what about the present day? Or at least the recent decade or so? Well, there's Trail Life USA, which actually has its own entry later down, which formed in 2013 in response to the Boy Scouts allowing openly gay leaders. In 2020, the LDS Church, who left Boy Scouts, formed a group called Vanguard Scouting. In 2001, a group called the Spiral Scouts formed around the Wiccan faith, which is a pagan religion I hadn't heard of until I researched this. There's also the Navigators USA, which formed out of some Boy Scout leaders in Harlem, which was sponsored by the Unitarian Church of All Souls. That was not an exhaustive list, but the reality is there exist other Scout organizations, either being more conservative and made in response to recent liberal scouting policies, or more liberal made in response to older conservative scouting policies. With the direction scouting has taken in the past 5 or so years, I wouldn't be surprised if some of the more liberal ones ended up rejoining scouting because they were literally formed in protest to, say, the LGBT ban, which is now lifted. So it's like, why not bring them into the larger Scouting America fold? But who knows? Obscure awards. There are other awards in scouting that are at least not known about by non-scouts like the Eagle Scout might be. Some of these, when I list them, any scout's going to be like, well, duh, that's obvious, but people watching this video might not know about them, so I will talk about them anyway. We've already covered the highest awards from other scout groups under the scouting umbrella, so I won't talk about them for now. I'll just keep this contained to the Scouts BSA specifically. Eagle Palms are an award designed to basically reward Eagle Scouts for not just dipping the minute they get Eagle Scout. To get a palm, Eagle Scouts must earn 5 more merit badges. Now, the requirements changed. When I got my bronze palm, you had to hold a leadership position in Scouts for 3 months and earn 5 merit badges. Now, you just have to demonstrate responsibility, which basically means you explain what you've done for the troop, and you do have to be present. But also, you can retroactively count merit badges you earned before your Eagle towards your palm. You earn a bronze palm, then a gold palm, then a silver palm. Hypothetically, you can earn unlimited palms, well, unlimited until you run out of merit badges that are also divisible by 5. So I think with 139 merit badges available now, you only need 21. So if we divide that by 5 with a remainder of 3, you could earn 23 palms. You earn a bronze palm, then a gold, then a silver, but you have to wear them in a way that represents the number of badges earned, with bronze equaling 5, gold 10, and silver 15, using the least amount of palms possible. So you might earn 5 wearing the bronze, then 10 and switch it for gold, and then 15 and switch it for the silver. But if you earn 20, you'd have to keep the silver and put the bronze back on. If you earn 25, you'd wear a silver and a gold, and if you earned 30, you'd wear 2 silvers. This is a chart showing how it works. Basically, you'd never wear multiple bronzes because any combination of 5s would equal 10, but you could wear more than 1 silver. I unfortunately only ever earned 1 bronze. There's also the 50 Miler Award, given to a scout who either rides horseback, hikes, bikes, or paddles 50 miles, and does 10 hours of community service. I should have applied for that because I know I biked that far, but whatever. There are also Fireman Chits and Toten Chips. These signify that you are qualified to make fire or use blades. The Toten Chip and Fireman Chit, don't ask me where those names come from because I don't know, are usually sorted out within your first few scout meetings because, if you're going to scout meetings, you want to light stuff on fire and play with knives. I have a little story about my time getting this. In my early days when I got the Toten Chip, they taught this thing called a blood circle, which basically was the idea that if someone had a blade out, no one should be within an arm's length of them in any direction. But as the years passed, we grew to have a problem with people establishing their blood circles by sticking the blade out and doing a giant circle as such. For this reason, the term was eventually changed to safety circle. I'm not sure if that actually did anything to help anyone, but I do remember that happening. There are several aquatics awards as well as some environmental ones. This is a somewhat complete list here. Weather Rock. I am about to present to you the most difficult thing scouts have to complete on their trail to Eagle. I believe this is a requirement for both the Weather Merit Badge and maybe Tenderfoot or Second Class, but at some point you have to make a weather device. Anyway, when I did it, the requirement was to make a device which would indicate or predict the weather. I think the idea they were going for was that you'd make, say, a barometer or a wind vane, but no, we came up with something much better. This is a weather rock. The weather rock is able to accurately predict a vast number of meteorological events. For example, if the weather rock is wet, it is raining. If the weather rock moves, the wind is blowing. If it is difficult to see the weather rock, it is foggy. If the rock is burning, there's a fire. If the rock was stolen, Wendigos might be afoot. I remember a campout where a bunch of younger scouts, including myself, were doing requirements, and the guy signing off on this one just got to the point where he wasn't even checking if we actually made it. He just asked us the device, and if we said weather rock, he just signed it. I'm struggling to remember what requirement it was actually for, but I do remember at least in the first troop I did it. Maybe it's died out though. There have to be troops where that just got banned. I'm almost positive. Eagle Scout letters. There's a cool thing you can do when you get your Eagle Scout. Usually your parents or Scoutmaster arranges this for you. You're able to request congratulatory letters on your Eagle from a bunch of government organizations, including the Office of the President. Usually this is an automated process, like I imagine your congressman probably has a spot on their website just labeled Eagle Scout letters. It's a well-established thing. I'll show some pictures of mine. I don't have them with me right now, but I have one from the president, my governor, a bunch, honestly. My parents got me like 30. It's a pretty cool tradition in my opinion. Scoutmaster's tea. Another ridiculous thing that popped into my mind while making this iceberg is this one game in particular. The point of the game is to teach scouts how to make good fires. The way I played it, at least, is that there were 2 twine strings suspended in between sticks, and you had to build a small fire that was below the first piece of twine, where the flames would burn away the 2 twine strings, and it's a race, so like multiple groups are doing this. After you've done it, you get a tea bag, water, and like a paper cup. You then race to heat up the water and present the Scoutmaster with tea. The way we played it in the first troop I was in, no matter how disgusting it was, like often the cup was literally melting, it would fall over and get dirt in it, bits would fall off the sticks suspending the twine. No matter how bad it was, the Scoutmaster had to drink it. And he did. I don't know how universal that experience actually is for scouts, but I just want to say it here. Meme requirements. Alongside the weather rock, there are lots of other badges or requirements that are just like insanely easy or goofy to the point where they're just a meme. One example is the fingerprinting merit badge, which I actually earned. Many argue this is the easiest merit badge out there, but obviously that's a bit subjective. To earn it, you have to maybe like describe 5 things about fingerprints, and then you can just take your own fingerprint with tape. Other requirements are funny. For example, traffic safety, which is sort of an easy merit badge in and of itself. You literally have to demonstrate how to put on a seatbelt. Potentially my favorite requirement that I discovered while researching for this video is requirement 5 of mammal studies, which asks you to, I shit you not, influence the numbers of 1 or more mammals. Not increase, not decrease, influence. You can make more or less of them. I can't get over why it's phrased that way. Like, they could have just said, maybe build a feeder for squirrels or something, but no, they leave it up to interpretation. Like, if you want to commit mass murder or forced copulation, go for it. Obviously, these aren't every single example, but merit badge requirements in general are rife with meme material. Name changes. So I've touched on this out of necessity throughout this video, but in this entry, I will give a full picture of the name changes which the Scouts have gone through. So remember that the group which was once known as the Boy Scouts was only one of a few organizations in the BSA, or the Boy Scouts of America, umbrella. Both that organization and the umbrella organization had name changes. The first happened in 2019 when Boy Scouts, or Boy Scouting, was changed to Scouts BSA. I maintain that this is the dumbest name ever because it literally stands for Scouts, Boy Scouts of America. However, the main organization name did not change. So boys and girls were called Scouts and were part of a program called Scouts BSA, which was in turn part of an umbrella organization called Boy Scouts of America. It felt like a rushed decision and a halfway effort. It made us feel like the Boy Scouts wanted to allow for girls to join, but also retain some branding and test the waters to see if there would be a lot of pushback or maybe just see how a real change later would come. They made a big point of saying that the Boy Scouts of America name wouldn't change, but just last month it did, becoming Scouting America for the 115th anniversary. Another thing that complicates this whole issue is that the organization still occasionally uses the term Boy Scouts of America. at least in web searches, which makes sense. I'm sure they redirect you, but ultimately it's a little confusing, and it sometimes feels like they're still endorsing that old name. I guess here is as good of a place as any to describe that time period. I'm not going to say whether or not what happened was good or bad, but I will say that it was rushed. These changes happened right while I was leaving, and it was definitely disruptive. First of all, the decision to let girls in was not a grand, progressive, or philosophical revelation. The LDS Church had announced 6 months earlier that they were going to end their partnership with Scouting and they would pull out 400,000 members. And just 3 months before that, the Scouts filed for bankruptcy. They needed the money. Troops for Boy Scouts and dens for Cub Scouts were supposed to be one gender, and existing troops and dens would decide if they wanted to make a sister troop or den, because ultimately they weren't letting girls join those troops, they were making entirely new ones. In practice, I don't think it ever actually worked like that. At mine, there was this one domineering parent in particular that only wanted to bring their daughter and son to one meeting a week, so through a series of decisions that were made without my knowledge, both our troop and our sister troop were having separate meetings, but in the same church at the same exact time. Sometimes an illusion of separation was attempted, but most of the time it was not. This might not have bothered me that much if it weren't for the fact that I was SPL at the time. So it basically meant that all the planning effort my friends and I made were just trampled on by these new adults. Like my ASPLs and I could make a whole meeting plan or something to that effect, and then we'd just be told we were doing something else with the girls, or otherwise that the plan had changed. More importantly, it meant that adults I had never met in my entire life were telling me what to do, instead of scoutmasters or leaders that I had known for a while and grew to respect and learn from. Obviously, none of this was the fault of the girls that this happened. It just felt that the BSA needed money, so they opened the floodgates and rolled out actual changes much later after years of deliberation and experiment. Now, have I investigated every single troop out there? No. Do some troops probably separate them well? Probably. But I've heard anecdotally that this in-practice co-edness is pretty common. I've been out of the organization for a long time, and a lot of this has since been rectified. It just did not feel right at the moment. For example, Family Life is an Eagle required merit badge, which I earned when I was like maybe 12 or 13, and it demanded pretty deep conversations about fatherhood and the responsibility of sex, like sex ed and specifically becoming a father and being a man in the family and how that's different from other roles. That was part of the merit badge, like that was part of the instruction. And for a while, until it was updated in 2023, girls had to earn that requirement. I just think more preparation could have been made and that the decision didn't need to be so rushed. To state the controversial opinion one can have about scouting, whether or not girls should be involved, I think they should be. Scouting has become so much more than what it was originally about. Sure, outdoorsmanship, manhood, and career preparation are all still there, but now it stands as this vast body of knowledge and learning, especially with regard to STEM and all sorts of life skills, and it's too important to gatekeep them. They shouldn't be gatekept. If every kid in America were an Eagle Scout, we would have no wars. Like, we would be at Alpha Centauri by now. I think the things that bothered me about the change were the politics behind it and how people characterized it. Girls have always been allowed in Boy Scouts of America. They could be Sea Scouts, they could be venturing scouts, they could do all these things. They could camp, they could cook, they could shoot guns. They were never held from any of those things. It was just that they couldn't be Cub Scouts or Boy Scouts, and importantly, earn the Eagle Scout rank. So there's this characterization that the Boy Scouts were this antiquated sexist organization, which isn't really true. Sure, it was the most well-known group of the Boy Scouts of America umbrella, but it was only one part of the organization. I think the de facto co-edness isn't the greatest. I'll be the first to say, like, just honestly, especially in my younger scouting years, I couldn't talk to girls. And a lot of the formative memories I had, running around the woods with my friends, lighting stuff on fire, digging holes for no reason, those were things I couldn't do at school. In scouting, I was able to be more of myself, because with co-ed schooling and activities comes, I'm no psychologist, but a sense of having to present oneself differently, having to avoid embarrassment. I can personally attest to the fact that there's much value in socialization amongst just guys. And that is officially the position of Scouting America. The troops aren't supposed to be co-ed, it's just that I'm not sure that's how it works in practice. The real issue was money, but the real issue was that girls couldn't enjoy the career benefits and prestige that came with the Eagle Scout rank. I often find this sort of thing comparable to like the WNBA. There were all these people that supported girls joining Boy Scouts, but they never themselves thought of joining venturing or sea scouting. They were not going outside, they were not camping, they were not doing any of the things that were part of being in this club. If you ask these people if they'd ever supported Girl Scouts in their life, or if they could name one Girl Scout level or award, they would say no. It's like asking people to name a WNBA player. Maybe they support equality in women's sports, but they never actually make the effort to support the people doing the most to make that happen. I don't know. My opinion on the situation is not fully set. It's also not fair of me to give an opinion given that I don't participate in the organization anymore. Maybe one day when I have kids or whatever, I'll be a volunteer, because I do maintain that Scouting America has my unwavering support. I suppose my experience in particular with the integration was just piss poor, to be very honest. It's also critical to note that Baden-Powell always envisioned scouting as being for boys and girls. There's a really fascinating letter where he talks about it. The issue is less, should girls be in Boy Scouts? It's more, should Girl and Boy Scouts be equal? Should Girl Scouts have Eagle Scout? Should they be in a separate program called Girl Scouts where they have the exact same requirements? Or should everyone be in a program called Scouts? It's more the specifics and it's more the prestige. I for one agree with Baden-Powell's initial interpretation. What I actually think should have happened is that the Boy Scouts should have bought out or absorbed Girl Scouts, or the cookie cartel as we like to call them. For anyone who doesn't know, and I mean this in an honest, direct way, Girl Scouts sucks. There's very little education or leadership training. It's very much just selling cookies. Very few people actually stay in that program after growing up a little bit. I think the Boy Scouts of America should have stayed the BSA or became Scouting America, but bought out Girl Scouts and built up the program using the existing infrastructure, or just created another program called Girl Scouts or Girl Scouting and maybe made a unique path to Eagle like that, or make an award that was just as hard and let the prestige for that award be generated over the years of these girls providing amazing contributions to America, like with what happened with the Eagle Scout. Obviously, if they had done it that way, it would have taken years of preparation, which they did not allot for. You would think for a group that says be prepared, they would have at least had an idea of what would have happened. I mean, surely they could have at least seen this coming from miles away and had the requirements prepped and ready to go. The way it went down was so much more opportunistic than thought through. I think, besides just my experience, the conversation as a whole bothers me, with these Americans complaining about how the Boy Scouts were just this awesome club that were intentionally excluding girls, but that's not what happened. Scouting is an idea, best expressed in the original book, but anyone, literally anyone, can make a scouting organization based off these ideas. The BSA just happened to become the greatest. Then, due to the hard work of these scouts over time, the Eagle Scout rank earned prestige. And later on, some people wanted girls to get into that program specifically, instead of having their own program that they forged over the years. Girls should be involved, and they should totally be allowed to achieve the highest honors. But I do think we're doing both boys and girls dirty by having nearly the same requirements instead of tweaking them to better suit both their needs, but it is what it is. LDS Church history. The LDS Church, or Mormons, have a very storied history with the Boy Scouts. In 1913, the LDS Church became the very first chartered organization of the Boy Scouts, and over time, it became like a pseudo-requirement for Mormon men to earn their Eagle Scout. The number of scouts who make it to Eagle is between 4 and 6%, but in Mormon units, it was nearly all of them, like upwards of 90%. Mormonism and scouting became deeply intertwined. There were leadership training meetings held in Salt Lake, and Mormon churches made their own troops. In 2015, the states which produced the most Eagle Scouts were Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming. Consequently, those are the most Mormon-dense states in the US. Historically, around 20% of Boy Scouts were Mormons, and for that reason, as you can imagine, they had a lot of sway in the organization. This whole connection to Mormonism really fascinates me. It's something I'd love to do a full project on one day. Their partnership basically continued until 2015, where Boy Scouts removed their ban on gay leaders, and the Mormons issued a statement of disagreement, basically. And then in December of 2018, fully decided to end the over 100-year-long partnership. They created their own program called the Vanguard International Scouting Association. If you can't tell, it definitely borrows some likeness from scouting. Some of the leadership on the website are literally pictured wearing Boy Scout uniforms. Vanguard is co-ed, and though I don't have any anecdotal experience about the program, It seems to be more about preparing Mormon youth for missionary trips than anything else. The Mormons also had an interesting role in the sex abuse scandal. Mormon bishops often covered up reports of sexual abuse instead of contacting authorities, both in general and specifically in scouting. A whistleblower from the BSA also claimed that his efforts to expand youth protection initiatives were often hampered by the Mormons, probably in an effort to protect themselves. The LDS Church and the BSA had also agreed that, if the LDS Church gave the BSA $250 million for the Victims Fund, BSA claimants would not be able to separately sue the church. But a judge rejected that agreement, thankfully, for giving the church too much protection. Abuse scandal. Bouncing off that last entry, I don't want to talk about this too much. There are really good documentaries about the situation that are out there, and they'd put this information in a much better light than I would bring it to you. While abuse in scouting really came to a head in 2020, it's been a problem in the organization for a long time. While I was a scout, I kind of held the position that abusers are simply drawn to places where kids are, and that is true. But on top of that, the BSA often did try and maintain good PR over comprehensive investigations, communicating with authorities, and publicly strategizing to actually end the problem. Abuse always existed, and in 1988, the BSA developed the Youth Protection Plan, or program, alongside experts in law enforcement, including an FBI agent specializing in this matter. It's a pretty good program and continues in some form to this day. I remember some of the general rules like the two deep policy, which basically says that two leaders have to accompany youth at all times. There's other rules such as hazing and truly secret organizations being completely banned. The OA obviously doesn't count because if any parent wants, they are allowed to be there. Some of the other major moments throughout the history of this issue include a 1991 Washington Times investigation, which brought to light the Pervert Files, or the Negligible Volunteer Files, which was basically a database that the BSA kept over the course of around 20 years to document adult male volunteers who, for reasons not limited to abuse, were not allowed to be leaders. The investigation actually concluded by sort of praising the BSA for implementing the Youth Protection Program, saying that it was one of the best programs of its kind out there. Also around this time, specifically from 86 to 91, tax returns showed that the BSA had paid about $500,000 to one law firm in Miami specializing in abuse cases, and that the BSA's insurance company had paid out about $62 million. However, the total cost of money paid is likely much higher, as that Times investigation showed that often the BSA only paid out these payments if they were kept secret. In 2010, a survivor took the BSA to court, showing that an adult leader who attacked him had previously confessed to having attacked 17 boys and stayed a part of the organization, and then in turn abused that particular victim. He was awarded $18.5 million, which was at the time the highest amount any single plaintiff had been given in a child abuse case in the USA. This case helped blow the top off this whole thing, especially because jury members were allowed to see the private files held by the BSA, the pervert files, that they had kept on all these volunteers. A verdict of a similar case in that same year resulted in the release of these files, but only from 65 to 85, which detailed abuse of scouts from leaders, many of whom involved people who never went to court. In fact, probably the worst thing that these files demonstrated was that about a third of the time, the cases described were not passed on to police. There's more in these files which basically just show that the BSA often preferred their own reputation to justice, declining to involve police in these matters and often trying to just pull the Boy Scouts' name out of things like this. Later on in 2020, the LDS Church faced 7 lawsuits regarding abuse in their own troops and had to commit $250 million to the Survivors Fund. This was around the time the BSA filed for reconstructive bankruptcy, stemming mostly from a culmination of these 82,000 abuse cases. As of January of this year, about 25% of the claims made via the settlement have been paid out, though there have been some delays with the process in general. There is no getting around the fact that the organization covered up incidents, and even if it happened a long time ago, those files were always there. The people involved at that level who knew about them, and I don't know who they are, and there are a lot of really good people in this organization who didn't know, don't get me wrong, but those people went to work every day for years, and every day they walked into work having the opportunity to do the right thing, and they didn't. However, it really does seem like the organization has moved towards much positive change, which I really appreciate. It's hard for me to envision having kids because that's so far away, but I definitely think when I have them, I would feel more than safe letting them go to scouting events, and that much of the worst is behind us. Like I said, though, I'm no expert on this. The documentaries, I watched one on Netflix, I think. They're very interesting. They're worth checking out. I highly recommend them. Trail Life USA. Trail Life USA is a contemporary alternative to Scouting America, created directly in response to the Boy Scouts allowing gay men to be leaders. It's a lot more religious, as you might imagine, and unlike Scouting America, which is also religious but non-denominational, it is explicitly Trinitarian Christian. There's no need to harp about it. I'm sure I could tell you their ranks or whatever. The reality is, it's a lot like Vanguard, where it's just similar to Boy Scouts, and the only funny thing to know about it is that the terminology is insanely cringe. Their top award is the Freedom Award, and they have all these awards and programs about manhood. I don't know anything about them. I never did them, obviously, but the names are just really weird. I don't get it. Trump speech. This entry refers to the speech that Trump gave in 2017 at the National Boy Scout Jamboree. I'm not sure what they told him behind the scenes or what speeches like this typically are, but I would wager that the idea was just to give general pieces of advice about serving the country or being good men or working hard or whatever. But Trump did not do that. He just bragged about beating Clinton and left a few absolutely hilarious lines.
Toward killing this horrible thing known as Obamacare. You're fired. By the way, just a question. Did President Obama ever come to a jamboree? Oh, you're Boy Scouts, but you know life. You know life. By the way, under the Trump administration, you'll be saying Merry Christmas again when you go shopping, believe me.
I honestly think it's really funny. I wish I could have been in the audience and been just as confused as these guys were. Right after this, the Chief Scout Executive actually published an apology for the speech being political. There's not much real lasting controversy over it. I just think it's funny. Removed merit badges. Lost media. What would an iceberg be without lost media? Oddly enough, no clickbait involved, I do actually get to bring to your guys' attention several instances of lost media in scouting, which is awesome. Merit badges ebb and flow. There were originally 57, and now there are about 3 times that number. They change, they're added, removed, sometimes removed and then added, but right now we're just going to talk about the ones that removed. It would be very difficult to address every single change that's ever happened or every single requirement that's been moved, so we'll just focus on entire merit badges that are gone. Also, a lot of merit badges were effectively just renamed. For example, there was once a textiles merit badge, which was eliminated right before textile was added. So I'm going to ignore a lot of these changes unless they're interesting, like the first example. The aviation merit badge was one of the original 57, but in 1942, it was split into 3 merit badges: aerodynamics, aeronautics, and airplane structure. Now, these 3 merit badges were all reconsolidated in 1952, 10 years later, back into aviation. So those other 3 are gone, but many of the requirements live on in one way or another. From 1911 to 1963, there was an automobiling merit badge, which I believe was actually about just driving a car. Now there's an auto maintenance merit badge and also a traffic safety merit badge, but no longer one about actually like how to drive a car, which makes sense. People just know how to drive cars now, but maybe not in 1911. Beef production was available from 1928 to 1975. Blacksmithing was eliminated in 1952. Botany was eliminated in 1992. Citrus fruit culture was eliminated in 1952. Corn and cotton farming were both eliminated in 1975. Forage crops was eliminated in 1975, which in and of itself was a replacement of grasses, legumes, and forage crops. Foundry practice was eliminated in 1952, the same year as blacksmithing. Same thing happened with hog and pork production, which became hog production and then disappeared in 1975. Master at Arms was a martial arts merit badge, which only lasted from 1910 to 11. They should bring that one back. The mining merit badge was eliminated in 1937. Nut culture was eliminated in 1954. Pigeon raising was eliminated in 1980. Rabbit raising was eliminated in 1993. There was once a seaman merit badge, which was replaced by seamanship and then eventually replaced by small boat sailing. Small grains and cereal foods was replaced by small grains, which then went away. Taxidermy was eliminated in 1952, as was wood turning. There's a really interesting group of eliminated merit badges which were reintroduced in 2010 only for the anniversary of Scouting. You could earn them at camps and such, but only that year. Carpentry, pathfinding, signaling, and tracking. This was part of a program called the Historical Merit Badge Program. The idea was kind of to give scouts a glimpse into what scouting looked like 100 years ago, even using scans of original pamphlets. I am extremely jealous of the scouts that got to earn these. I was way too young, but it sounds like an awesome experience. The tracking and stalking merit badges were about, following animals and birds and such, but one of the requirements was demonstrated evidence that you stalked a human and determining from their trail their gender, age, and other information about their gait. We now proceed to the final tier of the iceberg. As often goes with the last entry of an iceberg, it's tempting to just stuff this with memes, but I promise I'll give actually good closing entries. Religious debate. Depending on how you look at it, the last vestige of more conservative thought in Scouting America today is the atheism ban. Now, the atheism ban is sort of a contrapositive. It's not that there's an atheism ban so much as there is a religious requirement. In theory, it doesn't really try and ban anyone, and in practice, it certainly does not. What there is in scouting is a duty to God. Part of the scout oath is that a scout must do their duty to God and country. This is a mantra repeated at every meeting and board of review for advancement that a scout has. Spoiler alert, there is literally no theism test in any bit of scouting, and the subject as a whole is a very local thing. Perhaps if you live in an ultra-religious place, maybe it's more of an issue, but it really never is in practice. It has happened in the past. There's an article from 1970 about someone who was denied their rank of Eagle for being atheist, and even one from 2002 describing a pretty similar situation. Hypothetically, if you got to your Eagle Board review and just stood up and announced that you were an atheist and you could not in any way accomplish any duty to God, could you be denied your Eagle? Sure, but that hasn't happened recently and the likelihood of that happening is extremely low. But how does this actually work? Well, on paper, as a scout, not just an Eagle Scout, part of fulfilling your duty is to believe in some form of God. You can be any faith you want. It doesn't have to be monotheistic or polytheistic, doesn't have to be Christian, it could literally be Pastafarian or Jedi. You just have to believe something to the effect of there being an omnipotent being that evaluates your character. The intention in the scouting movement as a whole has always been to have religion, but non-denominational enforcement. Baden-Powell was a Christian and emphasized this. In Scouting for Boys, he wrote something to the effect of he wanted scouts to be good Christians, not just people who went to church on Sunday. However, later on, he clarified that scouting wasn't about any one belief or another, and it came to be that scouting generally and across the world just required some form of faith. Even when you look at what he was saying about Christianity in particular, he was more trying to say that he wanted scouts to be reverent and not just be people who go to church, which is a major challenge for Christians in general and something we should strive to do. But that advice isn't limited to Christianity, as he made pretty clear later on. So that's the historical perspective. In the BSA, it was always the same, and in fact, Boy Scouts have been very accommodating of niche faiths and faiths that are very unlike Christianity. Many faiths have their own awards in scouting. Basically, there's like a patch or medal you can get, which is always named something different based off the specific religion. For example, the Baha'i faith has an award called the Unity of Mankind. The Islamic one is called In the Name of God, and the Meher Baba one is called Compassionate Father. The requirements of each of these are different, but typically require you to just have conversations with your religious leader and do some sort of reflection or study. There was never any design to have religious discrimination in scouting, and I actually argue that in this way, scouting was once again progressive from the start. The BSA has showed so much progressiveness by accommodating these different faiths, and not just accommodating them, but providing pathways for scouts to grow in their faiths, even if they weren't typical American Christian denominations. It would have been really easy for the scouts to say they were religious, but in practice be Christian, which they didn't. It would have also been easy to ignore other religions and whatnot, only providing a pathway for advancement and deep self-reflection for Christians. But the BSA really strove to give scouts an option to engage deeper with their faith, and I think that's cool. It emphasizes a sort of growth that's hard to find in school or maybe even at home. The Boy Scouts don't care what God you worship, but they challenge you to grow your relationship with him. The question, though, obviously is, what about atheists? So again, no one at Scout meetings really presses you about your faith. You never get interrogated about it. There's no atheism detector or test they administer to check. My troop, for example, would often give very watered down prayers intended for any religion. You could speak about God naturally if the conversation came to it, and we did meet in a church, but people belong to different religions, and I'm positive there were agnostic folks or people who just didn't care about it too much. The real worry is that when a scout goes for their Eagle Board of Review, which is like a final interview to see if you deserve your Eagle, hypothetically, you could be asked about how you performed your duty to God, and if you said nothing, you might be denied your Eagle. Like I said, in practice, you have the opportunity to say literally anything to your defense, and it will work. It could just be remotely spiritual. I've looked into people saying different things across the board. Apparently, it gets asked on the BSA subreddit a lot. Generally, if you say anything related to morals or morality, you're fine. People often try to make this into another dig at the old-fashionedness of scouting, but I'll once again double down and support it, to be honest. And here's why. In 1910, tons of organizations like this were just Christians. Boy Scouts could have done this too, but boys once again made the effort to ensure boys of any religion could join. Scouting America, to this day, maintains all these different awards, and the organization has made the unique effort to actually learn about and have requirements for different and niche religions. I don't think having some form of spiritual requirement is too much to ask. And again, in practice, it's just as Christian as saying, "In God we trust," being on the dollar bill. No one is forced to do anything that they don't want to do. Native Americans. Native American lore in scouting is a really weird situation. On one hand, it can be extremely disrespectful. On the other hand, it provides American youth with maybe their only opportunity to learn about Native American culture. I'll explain what I mean. Various bits of scouting bring in Native American lore. It partially began with original influence from the Woodcraft Indians, and it bleeds into awards, vocabulary, ceremonies, and things just all around, especially in the OA. Now, it often falls into this idiotic American trap of considering Native Americans as one entity, people who wear feathers and paint their faces. And I personally saw a lot of really disrespectful treatment of Indians at my old troop. I definitely watched my scoutmaster paint himself red, put on a costume, and bang a drum and chant nonsense. However, on the other hand, when I went to Northern Tier, I had really detailed and accurate instruction about the local Inuit people and their traditions, and it inspired a continued interest of mine. Then you have the Indian Lore Merit Badge, which tasks you with explaining what makes different groups of Native Americans unique, learning about a specific tribe, learning words in a native language, learning a game played by a tribe and teaching it to your friends, and even visiting a contemporary Native American gathering. For some Americans, the only instruction about natives you might receive in high school is garbage about Thanksgiving and nothing else. So I do think it's a double-edged sword. In general, Scouting America defends this position, saying that they won't remove the Native American influence. Native American groups have called them out for cultural appropriation. The reality is, in my opinion, like many things in scouting, this is once again local. Depending on your troop or who's in charge of what, they might handle it in a really respectable way, or they might just be ignorant. In general, I don't advocate for the complete removal of these policies. I do think effort should be put into teaching scouts about the traditions and why they exist. I think effectively there needs to be a trade. If the Boy Scouts are going to borrow from these traditions, they need to learn about them. So I advocate for the Indian Lore Merit Badge being made mandatory for either the Eagle Scout rank or joining OA. However it happens, I just think some policies regarding respectfulness in general should be implemented nationally and enforced to the best degree. However, like I said, I've been gone for several years, so it's very probable it's trending in that direction anyway. SOAR. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now finally arrived at the final entry on this iceberg. I don't know how long this video is, but this is easily my longest script yet. This is actually 2,000 words longer than my master's thesis is going to be. To conclude this video, I will tell you the most fascinating piece of lost media Boy Scouts has to offer. SOAR. SOAR is a guide for Eagle Scouts, basically teaching more efficient strategies for earning your Eagle Scout rank, such as how to plan rank and merit badge requirements and how to earn them concurrently, and some ideas for Eagle Scout projects. Who wrote it, you ask? Me. I wrote this in 2019 as like a fun project my senior year of high school. I sold like a couple hundred copies on Amazon, and I ordered a bunch of them myself and would like peddle them at meetings. It was published through Amazon KDP, and I eventually took it down just because it became outdated with all the changes going on in scouting, and it needed to be updated. I said I'd do it, and I just never got around to doing it. Like I said, it sold a few hundred copies, which for me was like the coolest thing ever at the time. Anyways, had to put that on there. Before I close out this video, this whole iceberg might have you begging the question, should you join scouting? Or should you encourage your kid to join scouting in the future? Should you support scouting? Whatever. Well, I have a lot to say on that, but I will keep it brief. If you have a kid and you're looking for something for them to do, or you're like 14 watching this video and you yourself are looking for something to do, yes, you should join scouting. Major cities tend to have dozens of troops within driving distance, and you should check out a few before you commit to any one. They all have different vibes. Some are more professional, some are more STEM-ish, some are more outdoorsy, some are very different. But ultimately, scouting provides you with the opportunity to do so many things, and for that reason, I cannot recommend it enough. Earning my Eagle Scout and all of the requirements that came along the road to doing that really helped me academically and professionally, alongside teaching me how to change a tire on the side of the road. If you aren't able to join scouting, or you're a long ways from having a kid, but you do want to support scouting, you always can volunteer. But one thing you can do that really goes above and beyond and directly helps a scout and skirts all of the politics for whatever reasons you might have for not supporting them, the thing you could do the most to just help one person improve their life is donating specifically to Eagle Scout projects. You could just go to a troop and donate money and specify that it's used for Eagle projects, or you could give it to a scout you know who's doing one. But the money that scouts spend on their projects are directly injected into the community. They can't keep a single cent of it, and it serves as an incredible teaching opportunity for them, and also a peripheral learning experience for all the scouts who volunteer doing it. At my Eagle project, I was basically pumping money straight into my school. I myself was learning a ton, and then I had actually about 50 volunteers, many of whom were like 12-year-olds who for their first time were playing with saws. Everybody was learning, and it was a phenomenal experience in general. The more money said scout manages, the more they can accomplish. My fundraising effort personally went really well, so I actually got to expand the scope of my work along the way. And with what I was doing, $20 went a massive way. So if anything in this video interested you, if you're here at the very end and you want to help scouting, there are a billion ways to do so, but I highly encourage you to specifically donate to Eagle projects. Anyway, guys, that is the iceberg. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please feel free to share any stories, corrections, or additions in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe if you enjoy icebergs and deep dives into totally random stuff. Since this is the face reveal, I'm going to talk about some random things now, so if you're a fan of SeedButter, I'd love it if you stuck around a bit longer. First off, I want to truly thank you guys for a couple of amazing years doing this. I have loved every minute I've spent coming up with ideas, writing them up, editing, and even interacting with you guys on Discord. Upload days are easily the best day of the week when they come around, and doing this makes me so happy. I'd love to do it for a lot longer. That said, I wanted to announce something that I'm very excited about, which is my second channel. Yes, that's my actual name. This is a channel I started while I was living abroad, and at the moment it's dedicated to travel stuff, but it'll basically be a lower priority vlogging channel with all sorts of random stuff going up. In fact, we should have an upload the same day as this video. Even if you never watch a video from that channel, I implore you guys to give it a look and subscribe if you're willing. It would be amazing to get that channel to 1,000 subs pretty soon. Even if you never like a single video, never click on one, if you could sub to it, it would help me out greatly. There aren't a ton of videos there yet, but I have a ton of ideas in store, which I think will be very funny when I get to filming them. That said, as always, consider joining the SeedButter Discord server, the link to which is in the video's description. Also, if you want to count yourself amongst my greatest supporters who watched this video early and are thanked in every single upload, consider joining my Patreon, the link to which is once again in the video's description. Again, guys, thank you for everything. This video was one of the most fun to make so far, and though I won't be revisiting Boy Scouts anytime soon, it was really fun to share some personal stories and try out this new format. This is likely what I'll be doing with iceberg charts from now on. I have one more iceberg pretty similar to this, in that it's a general topic where I share some personal stories, and after that, it'll be much of the same videos that I usually make, just where you get to see me. I have a ton of videos lined up to make soon, so as always, there's plenty of content coming up, and I highly encourage you to stick around for more. All right, I'm finally done. Thank you all again, and have a great night.